Close your eyes. There is a story that is older than most stories, older than most questions. A story told by people who had run out of easy answers and needed something true instead. It begins with a man who had everything. And then, one morning, he didn't. His name was Job, and tonight we're going to sit with him. The man from Uz. There was a man in the land of Uz. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a prophet. He didn't carry the weight of a nation or speak on behalf of a people. He was simply a man, a farmer and a father, living in a place on the edges of the known world, far from the great cities, far from the temples, and the priests and the holy scrolls. His name was Job. He woke early. He worked honestly. He loved his children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. And when they gathered to feast together, as they often did, Job would rise before dawn the next morning and offer prayers for each of them, one by one, just in case they had said something wrong in the night without knowing it. He was, by every measure that mattered, a good man. His flocks were vast. His household was full. His name was known and respected far beyond the borders of Uz, and people who had never met him spoke of him the way people speak of someone rare, a man whose life and character were somehow the same thing. He was the greatest man in all the East. And then, on an ordinary morning, in the middle of an ordinary day, everything changed. The hedge comes down. While Job was tending to his life on earth, something was happening elsewhere. In the courts of heaven, the sons of God had gathered, and among them came a figure the ancient text calls the adversary, not a demon, not a devil, in the way we might picture one, but something more like a prosecuting attorney, a questioner, a tester of things. God spoke first. "Have you seen my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth. He is blameless. He is upright. He fears me and turns from evil." The adversary didn't argue the point. He asked a question instead. Does Job fear God for nothing? It is a quiet question, but it cuts deep. "You have built a hedge around him," the adversary said, "around his household, around everything he has. You have blessed the work of his hands. His flocks increase every season. Of course he is faithful, but take away what he has. Stretch out your hand and touch it all, and he will curse you to your face." God's answer was this: everything he has is in your hands. And so the hedge came down. Job did not know this conversation had happened. He had no way of knowing. He was still in Uz, on his land, going about his day, when the first messenger arrived. He was breathless. He said, "Your oxen were plowing, your donkeys grazing nearby, and raiders came out of nowhere and took them all. The servants are dead. I alone escaped to tell you." Before the first messenger had finished speaking, a second arrived. "Fire fell from the sky," he said. "It burned up the sheep, burned up the servants tending them. I alone escaped to tell you." Before the second had finished, a third. 3 raiding parties came from 3 directions. They took all the camels. They killed the servants. I alone escaped to tell you. And before the third had drawn another breath, a 4th messenger came through the door. And this one's face was different. "Your sons and daughters," he said, "they were feasting at your oldest brother's house. A great wind came from the desert. It struck the 4 corners of the house." He paused. "They are dead." Job stood up slowly. He tore his robe. He shaved his head. He fell to the ground. And then he said something that no one, listening to this story for the first time, quite expects. "Naked I came from my mother's womb. Naked I will return. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." He didn't rage. He didn't curse. He sat in the rubble of his life and he worshipped. And that was the first day. The ash heap. But the story wasn't finished. The adversary returned to the heavenly council, and God said again, "Have you considered my servant Job? He still holds fast to his integrity, even though you moved against him, to destroy him without reason." Without reason. The text doesn't soften those words. It doesn't explain them away. The adversary pressed further. "A man will give everything to save his own life, but stretch out your hand and touch his flesh and his bones. Then he will curse you to your face." And so the second wave came. Job was struck with sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. He sat down in the ash heap, the place outside the city where waste was burned, where the things no longer useful were left. And he took a piece of broken pottery and scraped his skin with it. His wife came to him. She had lost everything too. She had watched her children die. She had seen her husband destroyed. And she looked at this man, this good man, sitting in the ash and the pain, and she said, "Are you still holding onto your integrity? Just curse God and die." She wasn't a villain. She was a woman with nothing left, offering her husband the only exit she could see. Job looked at her and said quietly, "You are speaking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" Then came the friends, 3 of them, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They had heard what happened, and they came from their own countries, made an appointment together, and traveled to be with Job. When they saw him from a distance, they didn't recognize him. His suffering had changed him so completely that the people who knew him best couldn't tell who he was. They wept. They tore their robes. They threw dust into the air over their heads, and then they sat down on the ground beside him. And for 7 days and 7 nights, no one said a word, because they could see that his grief was very great, and they knew that no word they had was large enough for it. 7 days of silence, 7 days of simply being there. Before any of them reached for an explanation, before anyone tried to make it mean something, they just sat with him in it. That silence was the most honest thing the friends ever gave him. The curse. On the 8th day, Job opened his mouth. He did not curse God, but he cursed the day he was born. "Let the day perish on which I was born," he said, "and the night that said, a boy is conceived. Let that day be darkness. Let God above not seek it. Let no light shine on it. Why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb? For now I would be lying down in quiet. I would be asleep, at rest." He wasn't walking away from God. He was talking to him in the only language his grief had left. He was telling the truth about where he was, instead of performing a peace he didn't feel. That is the oldest form of prayer there is. The friends find their voices, and then Eliphaz spoke, and he was the gentlest of the 3. He began with care. "You have helped many people," he said. "You have strengthened weak hands. Your words have kept men on their feet. But now trouble comes to you, and you are dismayed." Then he turned. "Think," he said, "who that was innocent has ever perished? Where have the upright been destroyed? I have seen it, those who plow iniquity, those who sow trouble reap the same. By the breath of God they perish." Bildad followed, sharper. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? If your children sinned against him, he gave them over to their transgression. But if you yourself seek God, if you are pure and upright, he will restore you. Your former life will seem small compared to what is coming. And Zophar, the bluntest of all, know this, Job. God has even forgotten some of your sin. He is exacting from you less than your guilt deserves. 3 men, 3 versions of the same idea. You are suffering because you did something. Find it, confess it, and this will end. They weren't cruel men. They came when others didn't. They sat in the ash heap for 7 days without speaking. They loved Job in their way. but they could not hold an unanswered question. The silence of a suffering without cause was too uncomfortable, so they filled it with a cause. If there is a reason, there is a lesson. If there is a lesson, there is control. And if there is control, then what happened to Job cannot happen to them. It is a very human thing to do. And it left Job completely alone. Job refuses. Job pushed back. Not with anger at first, with exhaustion. Will you speak falsely for God? He asked them. Will you speak deceitfully for him? Will you show him partiality? Will you plead the case for God? Then, more quietly, I hold fast to my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. He knew his own life. He knew what he had done and what he hadn't. And he refused, even now, even here in the ash heap, with 3 wise men arrayed against him, to confess to something that wasn't true. He turned toward heaven instead. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, he said, that I could come to his seat. I would lay my case before him. I would fill my mouth with arguments. I would know what he would answer me. I go forward, but he is not there. Backward, but I cannot perceive him. On the left, where he is working, I cannot behold him. He turns to the right, and I cannot see him. He wasn't losing faith. He was reaching for something that felt very far away, and he kept reaching, even in the dark. The long middle. The arguments went on. Eliphaz spoke again, Bildad spoke again, Zophar spoke again. Job answered each of them again and again, through chapter after chapter. Refusing to agree, refusing to perform a confession he couldn't honestly make, refusing to give them the resolution they were looking for. And through all of it, heaven was silent. God did not speak, did not intervene, did not send a sign or a word or a messenger to clarify things. And then, near the end of the arguments, a young man named Elihu appeared, someone who had been sitting and listening the whole time, too young to speak before his elders, too frustrated to stay quiet any longer. He was angry at Job's friends for finding no answer, and he was angry at Job too, for what he saw as self-justification. He spoke at length, and what he said had some truth in it, that God speaks in ways we don't always recognize, that suffering can shape a person, that the silence of God is not the same as the absence of God. But even Elihu, for all his passion, could only speak about God. He had never heard from him. And then the wind changed. A storm gathered on the horizon, a great wheeling darkness, full of noise. And out of the whirlwind, God spoke. The whirlwind. Who is this that darkens counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. Not an explanation. Questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you know, or who stretched the line upon it? Have you entered into the springs of the sea? Have you walked in the recesses of the deep? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Tell me, if you know all this, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or loose the belt of Orion? Can you lead the bear with its children? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? On and on, through 2 full chapters. The mountain goats giving birth on the high crags, the wild donkey roaming free across the salt flats, the hawk riding the warm currents south, the war horse trembling with eagerness at the sound of the trumpet. God was not crushing Job with power. He was opening a window. He was saying, the world is larger than the argument you have been having, larger than the theology your friends brought to the ash heap, larger than the framework of deserving and punishment and cause and effect. There are things woven into the fabric of creation that no human mind has mapped, forces at work in the wild places that have nothing to do with any accounting system anyone has built. And Job's suffering lives inside that same vast, uncharted world. Job listened. And when God had finished, Job said something very quiet. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes have seen you. That was all. Not, now I understand. Not, now I have my answer. Not, now it all makes sense. Just, now I have seen you. The encounter was enough, what God said to the friends. Then God turned to Eliphaz. My anger burns against you and your two friends, he said, because you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. The friends, with all their careful theology, all their logical frameworks, all their well-intentioned explanations, had not spoken rightly about God. Job had. Job, with his raw grief and his refusal to lie, with his desperate reaching into the silence, he had spoken more truly than all of them. They were told to go to Job and offer sacrifices, and Job would pray for them, which he did. And after Job prayed for his friends, God restored his fortunes. He received twice what he had before. His brothers and sisters came to him. His daughters were born, 3 of them, and the text takes a moment to say that they were the most beautiful women in all the land, and that Job gave them an inheritance alongside their brothers, which was unusual and which the writer thought was worth noting. He lived another 140 years. He saw his children's children, 4 generations, and then, the text says simply, Job died, old and full of days. That is the story. A man who was faithful and lost everything, who sat in the ash heap and refused to lie about where he was, who cried out into a silence that lasted longer than any silence should, who argued with 3 well-meaning friends, who wanted to explain his suffering more than they wanted to sit with him in it, and who, at the end, received not an explanation, but a presence, not an answer, but an encounter. The book of Job was written for the person who has done everything right and still found themselves in the dark. It was written so you would know that the honest cry is not a failure, that the silence is not the same as absence, that somewhere on the other side of the long middle, the whirlwind comes. You don't have to figure out why tonight, you only have to rest. The story knows where you are, and morning is already on its way.